God for the opportunity to do this. I am Teresa Spencer, student at Liberty University, and my topic this morning for a informative lesson is on the Christian worldview. Does anybody know what a Christian worldview is? Does anybody have any idea of what a Christian worldview is? Well, Christian worldview basically is a worldview is assumed that a model of reality through which a society understands and interprets the world. It is like an invisible map through which we perceive reality. So it's like the world, what we see. It's through the eyes, the lens through what we see. And it's called a biblical worldview or Christian worldview. And we all have a worldview. We just somehow don't realize what it actually is. And when we define the Christian worldview is a conceptual framework or view of the world, a belief system that guides individuals' behavior, okay? And the framework is, our framework is the Bible. That's the framework. That's our framework. That's where we see everything that we do, that we hear, that we say, how we raise our children. That's what we use as our framework. And then it says, what does the Bible say? Okay. Well, Joshua 1:8 says, this book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth. And it says, to all them that are written, you have to do all that is written therein, for thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success. That's what the Bible says concerning our worldview. And it says, someone with a biblical worldview believes his primary reason for existence is to love and to serve God, okay? That's what a biblical worldview is. Now, what's also interesting about our biblical worldview is that it's also the way we communicate one to another, okay? We communicate in so many different ways. And here on our thing, it has, communication. And communication is so many different ways. How we hear, how we think, how we see, what we say, what we do. Even the media is part of our communication, okay? And when we communicate with one another, a writer says, when we communicate with one another, we may not realize it, but we speak, think, and form relationships through our worldview. Through our biblical worldview. This is what we see through, and that's how we form our relationships, whether it's in church or in our homes. 2 Corinthians 6:14 says, be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? What communion hath light with darkness? This is all about communication. This is how we communicate. And then one of the writers says, communication gives us the ability to share our beliefs, values, ideas, and feelings. It also enables us to build strong and healthy relationships, groups, and communities. Okay? So this is how we communicate. So what does the Bible say about how we should communicate? Well, Ephesians 4:29 says, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to use of the edifying, that it may minister grace unto the hearers. So this is all about our communication. We have to communicate through our own worldview, and that's how we communicate. Amen? Amen. Okay, God creates humans. A writer said that God creates humans with the ability to communicate with him and with other people, and to create and foster a sense of community. This is all about our worldview. A writer also says a worldview, like we said, is a way of interpreting our world. It is a worldview is a complex systems of interpretations of experiences and orderings of relationships that provides cohesive way of understanding reality. Okay? This is all about our worldview. So now our Christian worldview perspective may bring prejudice, how to share it with our children, with our youth, and with other generations. And one of the writers says, we argue that religious prejudice is enduring correlate of religious differences because people are motivated to protect their religious beliefs. So someone comes and wants to talk about our beliefs or say something contrary, we get very defensive. And it says, and one of the writers also says, for many people, religion functions as an important set of beliefs about the world through which they interpret their reality and make meaning of their lives. And it says also concerning our youth now, okay, it says, problem amongst the present generation is that through especially electronic media, they are exposed to and confronted with a variety of sometimes even conflicting world views. And so we got to be careful how we train and how we teach our youth. We can remind them of Jeremiah 29:11. It says, for I know the thoughts that I think towards you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end, or to give you a hope and a future. And it says too often, one of the writers says, too often we are not as effective as educators and as we should be, while we should be in enabling our students to see the connections between spiritual and academic, meaning how to teach them concerning school, and also be able to still connect their spiritual foundation within what they hear in our schools and in the field of education. It's very important to be conscious of how we train our youth and how we believe what we believe. So our prejudices and how we form our relationships with our children. The biblical worldview. Well, what does the Bible say? So this one has it has the Bible, and then it says read me. You know, if you really want to know about your own worldview, take the Bible. The Bible says in Romans 12:2, it says, and be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. That's part of our worldview. Colossians 3:17 says, and whatsoever you do in word and deed, do all in the name of the Lord, giving thanks to God and to the Father by him. So we have to be able to understand that it is, if we want to know how we should think, we want to know how we should act or react, what we should do and should not do, it is all in the Bible. This is our worldview, the lens through what we see. And then there's what we call a skewed worldview, or something that gets distorted. How does something get distorted? Because maybe we hear something or see something that kind of contrary to what we already believe. Romans 1:21-22 says, for although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. One of the writers says, due to the reliance people have on their worldviews, experiencing disconfrontation of worldviews can be life-transforming or catastrophic, or even catastrophic. So either it's going to transform your life for the better or even for the worse. And sometimes it becomes catastrophic. That means it harms you, and so much so that your foundation is now shaken or even sometimes broken away. Biblical truths of worldview. The Christian worldview. One of the writers says, God exists and reveals himself to all of creation in many ways, but especially through his word, both the incarnate word, Jesus Christ, and the written word. This is how we know our worldview. We see it through our eyes, through the Bible, through the biblical way. We find in Genesis, the first chapter, it says, then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, so that we may rule over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals and all of the creatures move along. So this is, we find in the Bible, somebody may say, well, we can only see our worldview in the New Testament. No, it goes all the way back into the Old Testament when God created man. That's where our worldview actually begins. It began in the Old Testament and Genesis. And that's how we perceive our world. That's how we know our world. And the biblical story, a writer says the biblical story starts with God's creation of everything that exists. That means everything we see, everything we eat, everything that exists. That's what our worldview is. So I hope that this has been informative for you. I hope that you understand or have a better understanding of what a Christian worldview or biblical worldview is. It's the lens through which we see everything that we do and also how we communicate. Amen?
Amen.
Amen.